Margaret had a way of holding court in any room she entered. She wasn't loud or ostentatious. Her power was a quieter, more insidious thing. It was in the precise, deliberate way she'd place a hand on your arm, a gesture that felt less like affection and more like a claim of ownership. It was in the gentle, knowing smile that could curdle the air, turning a compliment into a veiled critique. For 5 years, I had studied her, the formidable matriarch of the Weston family, and I had tried my best to love her, because I loved her son, Ben, and loving Ben I had learned meant navigating Margaret. Our relationship was a carefully constructed truce. I was the architect, after all. I understood structure, the importance of a solid foundation, the necessity of bearing walls. I had treated my place in her family like a complex design project. I remembered birthdays. I brought the perfect hostess gifts. I really listened to her long, meandering stories about Ben's childhood, stories in which she was always the hero, the selfless, sacrificing mother. I bit my tongue when she rearranged the throw pillows on my sofa, a silent commentary on my taste. I smiled when she referred to my career as my little hobby. I did all of this because Ben, my wonderful, kind, brilliant Ben, was worth it. He saw the best in everyone, including his mother, and for his sake, I tried to see it too. She just wants to feel included, he'd say, his brow furrowed with a familiar, gentle earnestness after a particularly trying family dinner. She's from a different generation, Elara. Her whole life has been about her family. It's all she knows, and so I included her. I invited her to lunch. I asked for her recipes, which she would give me with one crucial ingredient deliberately omitted. I built a bridge to her, brick by painstaking brick, over a chasm of generational divides and unspoken rivalries, and I truly thought, it was working. The truce was holding, the structure was sound. I was a naive, hopeful fool. The news came on a Tuesday, in a thick, cream-colored envelope with an unfamiliar solicitor's crest embossed on the flap. My great aunt Isolde, a woman I had met only a handful of times in my childhood, had passed away. She had been a recluse, an eccentric who lived in a crumbling old house by the sea. And I remembered her only as a whisper of lavender and old books, and she had left me everything. It wasn't a fortune in the grand scheme of things, but to me too. It was the world, enough to pay off our mortgage, enough to travel, enough, most importantly, to finally do what Ben and I had been dreaming of for years, to leave our corporate firms and start our own, Weston and Hayes architecture. A practice built on our shared vision, our own rules, our own sweat and soul. I sat on our living room floor, the solicitor's letter shaking in my hand, and I cried. Not from grief for an aunt I barely knew, but from a profound, overwhelming wave of relief and joy. It was the key to the future we wanted, a future we thought was still a decade away. My first instinct was to call Ben, to scream the news into the phone, but I stopped myself. His birthday was in 2 weeks. The funds would be transferred by then. I could give him the greatest gift imaginable. I could wrap up our future and hand it to him, a perfect, beautiful surprise. The thought of the look on his face, his incredible, surprised face, filled me with a warmth that spread through my entire body. Keeping a secret like this from my husband, the man I told everything to, was going to be difficult. We were partners in every sense of the word. The secret felt like a living thing, a humming, vibrant energy I had to contain. And in a moment of weakness, a moment of wanting to share my joy with someone, to have it validated, I made the worst decision of my life. I decided to tell Margaret. I thought it would be a gesture of trust, the final cementing brick in the bridge I had so carefully built. I would make her my confidant. I would bring her into the circle of the secret, showing her that I saw her not just as Ben's mother, but as my own. I invited her for coffee. At a quiet cafe far from her usual haunts. I was laying the groundwork, treating it like a client presentation. The setting, the timing, the delivery, all meticulously planned. I was about to present my heart to the one person I should have known would drop it. She leaned across the small table, her blue eyes, so like Ben's but so much colder, wide with what I mistook for excitement. I had just laid it all out for her, the reclusive great aunt, the unexpected inheritance, the dream of our own firm, the secret. I had handed it to her, a fragile, precious thing, and begged her to protect it. Oh, Elara, she breathed, placing her cool, dry hand over mine. Her fingers were adorned with perfectly manicured nails and the heavy, ornate rings she never removed. This is just wonderful news, truly. I am so happy for you, for both of you. The relief was instantaneous and intoxicating. I had been so nervous, my heart hammering against my ribs. But her reaction was perfect. She was warm, she was enthusiastic. She was motherly. The Margaret I had always hoped to find was sitting right here, squeezing my hand in a gesture of solidarity. It has to be a secret, though, I reiterated, my voice low and earnest. I want to surprise Ben for his birthday. I have this whole plan to present it to him, the business plan. The financials, everything. It's going to be the start of our new life, so please, Margaret. Not a word to anyone, especially not Ben. My lips are sealed, she said, her smile warm and reassuring. She raised her hand in a mock pledge. You have my word. This will be our little secret. Oh, it's so lovely to have a secret with you, dear. I feel like we're finally, she winked, a conspiratorial, girlish gesture that seemed so out of character it should have been a red flag instead. I drank it in, like a fool. I thought we were finally bonding. I thought I had finally, after all these years, been accepted. The 2 weeks leading up to Ben's birthday were filled with a giddy, nervous energy. I worked on the business plan late into the night, my laptop glowing in the dark as Ben slept soundly beside me. I designed our logo, a clean, clever intertwining of a W and an H. I scouted potential office spaces online. The dream was becoming tangible, a blueprint I could almost touch. Margaret was a dream. She called me twice, her voice buzzing with faint excitement. Just calling to see how our little secret is going. She'd whisper theatrically into the phone. I'm just bursting. It's so hard not to tell Ben. You've put me in a terrible position. She'd add with a chuckle, a little joke that now, in retrospect, feels like a shard of glass in my throat. The night of Ben's birthday dinner arrived. It was being held at his parents' house, a sprawling, perfectly kept home that always felt more like a museum than a place where people actually lived. Every surface gleamed, every cushion was plumped. It was Margaret's kingdom. And we were all just subjects visiting for the evening. The whole family was there. Ben's father, Richard, a quiet, kind man who seemed to have been permanently muted by his wife's overwhelming presence. Ben's sister Clara, her husband, and their two boisterous children. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole Weston clan assembled and ready. I felt a hum of excitement in my veins. Tonight was the night. After dinner, after the cake, I would take Ben aside and give him his gift. I had it all in a beautiful leather portfolio, the business plan, the logo, the letter from the solicitor. It was tucked away in my bag, a secret waiting to be born. The dinner was loud and cheerful. Stories were told. Wine flowed. Ben, seated at the head of the table, was glowing, his handsome face lit with happiness. He caught my eye from across the table and smiled, a secret, loving smile just for me. And I thought, this is it. This is what happiness feels like. Then Margaret stood up, tapping her wine glass with a knife. The room fell silent, a hush of anticipation. She was going to make a toast. She loved making toasts. It was her chance to be the center of attention, the gracious, loving matriarch. I just want to say a few words about my wonderful son, Ben, she began, her voice thick with emotion. She beamed at him, a vision of maternal pride. He is a man of such integrity, such honesty. He has made his father and me so incredibly proud. She paused, her eyes sweeping the table. They landed on me, and she smiled. It was not the warm, conspiratorial smile from the cafe. It was a different smile, a smile with teeth, a predator's smile. And he has chosen a wife, she continued, her gaze locked on mine, who is full of surprises. My blood ran cold. I knew, with a sickening, plummeting certainty, what was about to happen. I wanted to scream, to stand up, to stop her, but I was paralyzed, pinned in my chair by the force of her will. In fact, Margaret said, her voice ringing with false cheerfulness, Elara has been keeping a very big, very exciting secret from all of us, especially from you, my dear Ben. She turned to him, her face a mask of loving concern. She's just been waiting for the right moment to tell you that she's come into a great deal of money, a huge inheritance, enough to change your lives completely. She was going to tell you eventually, of course. She just didn't want to bother you with it. Let's all raise a glass, shall we, to Elara and to her. Discretion. The silence in the room was a physical thing. It pressed in on me, suffocating me. Every eye was on me. Ben's face was a canvas of shock, confusion, and a dawning, terrible hurt. He looked at me, his eyes asking a question I couldn't answer. Why wouldn't you tell me? Margaret sat down, her smile serene, triumphant. She had taken my beautiful, precious secret and twisted it into a weapon in one fell swoop. She had painted me as deceptive, untrustworthy, a stranger who kept secrets from her own husband. She hadn't just revealed my secret. She had revealed her true self. The truce was over. The bridge I had so carefully built had just been blown to smithereens. And I was standing in the rubble. The drive home was a silent, suffocating ordeal. The air in the car was thick with unspoken words. With the wreckage of Margaret's toast, Ben gripped the steering wheel. His knuckles white, his jaw tight, he stared straight ahead, his profile a rigid, unforgiving line against the passing streetlights. I sat in the passenger seat, feeling small and cold, the leather portfolio in my bag now feeling like a block of lead. I tried to speak, to explain, but the words wouldn't come. What could I say? I wanted to surprise you. It sounded so flimsy, so childish, compared to the narrative Margaret had so expertly woven, the narrative of me, the deceitful wife, when we finally got back to our apartment. The silence broke, but not with understanding. It broke with the sharp, jagged sound of Ben's hurt and inheritance. Alara, he said, his voice quiet, but edged with a steel I had never heard before. He wasn't yelling, it was worse than yelling, a life-changing amount of money, and you didn't think to tell me. I was going to, I whispered, my voice trembling. Tonight. For your birthday. It was supposed to be a surprise. I have it all here. I fumbled in my bag, pulling out the portfolio, my grand, stupid gesture. I held it out to him. He looked at it, then back at me, his eyes full of a pain that was like a physical blow. A surprise, he repeated, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. So instead of telling me, your husband, your partner, you told my mother. You confided in her before you confided in me. And there it was, the brilliant, cruel genius of her plan. She hadn't just exposed my secret. She had driven a wedge between us, using my trust in her as the hammer. She had made me look like a fool, and she had made him feel like a bigger one. I thought she could keep a secret. I said, the words tasting like ash. I thought we were building a relationship. I trusted her. You trusted her, he said, the words landing like stones. But you didn't trust me. That's what everyone at that table heard tonight. Alara, that's what I heard. He turned and walked into our bedroom, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch echoed in the silent apartment like a gunshot. It was the first time in our 5 years of marriage that he had ever closed a door on me. I sank onto the sofa, the leather portfolio falling from my hands. The pages slid out, scattering across the floor. The logo I had designed, the business plan I had agonized over, the beautiful, hopeful future, all of it tainted, ruined. Tears streamed down my face, hot and silent. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, undiluted rage. The next few days were a living hell. The phone calls started in the morning. First, Aunt Clara. Alara, dear, I'm sure you meant well, but Ben looks so blindsided. It's usually best to be open about these things in a marriage. Then his father, Richard. His voice full of a weary disappointment. Margaret is very upset, Alara. She feels she did the right thing, bringing it all out into the open. Secrets can be so damaging in a family. They were all on her side. She had spun her story, painting herself as the concerned mother, the champion of honesty, forced to take drastic measures to protect her son from his secretive wife. I was the villain. She was the victim. It was her masterpiece. Ben was a ghost in our apartment. We moved around each other with a careful, painful distance. He was polite, but cold. The warmth, the easy intimacy that had been the bedrock of our marriage was gone. He slept with his back to me, a continent of mattress between us. I felt like I was losing him. I felt like she was winning. The grief was a heavy, suffocating blanket. For a week, I wallowed in it. I replayed the dinner over and over in my mind, her triumphant smile, the shock on Ben's face, the judging eyes of his family. I let their narrative infect me, and I started to doubt myself. Had I been wrong? Was I foolish to try and surprise him? Was I, in fact, the one who had broken our trust? But then, slowly, something else began to bubble up through the grief. It was a cold, hard anger, an anger born of a betrayal so profound it had reshaped the landscape of my world. I thought about her wink in the cafe, her conspiratorial whispers on the phone. She hadn't just broken a promise, she had played me. She had used my trust, my goodwill, my genuine desire for a connection, as tools for her own petty power games. This wasn't a misunderstanding, this was a declaration of war. The architect in me, the part of me that had been dormant and grieving, began to wake up. The part that understood stress points and load-bearing walls and the precise, devastating physics of demolition. Margaret had built a life, a reputation, on a carefully constructed facade of matriarchal perfection, a facade of honesty and integrity. She had taken a sledgehammer to the foundation of my life. Fine, I would find the cracks in hers, and I would bring the whole damn thing down. The catalyst for my revenge came from an unlikely place, a dusty, forgotten box in the back of our spare room closet. I was looking for old project blueprints for a portfolio I was half-heartedly trying to update. A desperate attempt to feel some semblance of my old, professional self. Tucked behind a stack of architectural drawings was a box labeled Weston Family Photos, pre-2000. It was a box of old pictures I had offered to digitize for Margaret years ago. A project she had been enthusiastic about for a week. Before losing interest, leaving the box of originals with me, another one of my failed attempts to win her affection, I pulled the box out, a wave of bitterness washing over me. I was about to shove it back into the closet, but something made me stop. Curiosity, a nascent, unformed desire to dig into the past she so carefully curated. I lifted the lid. The box was a jumble of old, faded photographs, Ben as a gap-toothed kid on a bicycle. A family vacation to the Grand Canyon, everyone, squinting in the sun, Christmas mornings, birthdays, the standard, wholesome iconography of a happy family. I sifted through them, a strange, detached archaeologist of a life I had tried so hard to be a part of. And then I found it. Tucked at the very bottom, underneath a stack of loose photos, was a smaller, cigar-shaped box. It was out of place, different from the other photo envelopes. My fingers trembled slightly as I lifted it. It wasn't locked. I opened it. Inside were not photographs, but letters, a small stack of them, tied together with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was thin, almost translucent with age, and covered in a spidery, elegant handwriting that I did not recognize. But the name in the salutation made my breath catch in my throat. My dearest Margaret. My heart started to pound, a slow heavy drumbeat in my ears. This was a violation, a deep, unforgivable intrusion into a privacy I had no right to, and I didn't care. All my carefully constructed ethics, my belief in privacy and respect, had been shattered at that dinner table. She had forfeited her right to my respect. With trembling hands, I untied the ribbon. The first letter began, "My dearest Margaret, even a week after our weekend in the city, I can still smell your perfume on my coat. To see you, even for those stolen hours, is to feel the world come alive in color again. Richard is a good man, I know, but he does not see the fire in you. I do." I had to read it 3 times before the words fully registered. Richard is a good man. This wasn't a letter from her husband. This was a love letter from another man, an affair. My mind reeled. Margaret Weston, the paragon of family values, the self-righteous matriarch who had judged me for keeping a secret from my husband, had been keeping a secret of her own. A secret that spanned decades. I devoured the letters, my eyes flying across the page. They were passionate, filled with longing and references to secret meetings, stolen weekends, and clandestine phone calls. They spoke of a love that was deep and real, and utterly illicit. The letters were signed with a single initial, A. Underneath the letters was a small, black and white photograph. It showed a much younger Margaret. Her hair styled in a way I recognized from the early 80s. She was laughing, her head thrown back in genuine, uninhibited joy, a kind of joy I had never, ever seen on her face. Her arm was linked with a handsome man in a turtleneck sweater. He was looking at her with an expression of pure adoration. It was not Richard. I stared at the man's face, a jolt of recognition running through me. I knew him. I had seen him at Weston family gatherings over the years. He was a family friend. A man who had been in their lives for as long as anyone could remember. Arthur Prescott, a respected lawyer, a pillar of the community. Richard's old college roommate, Uncle Arthur, as Ben and Clara had been taught to call him, Arthur. I felt a dizzying, sickening wave of vertigo. The carefully constructed history of the Weston family, the one Margaret had presented to the world, was a lie. Her entire life, her entire marriage, her entire platform of moral superiority, was built on a foundation of deceit. I carefully placed the letters and the photograph back in the small box, my hands no longer trembling. They were steady. My mind, which had been a fog of grief and anger, was suddenly sharp and clear. The rage was still there, but it was no longer a hot, chaotic thing. It had cooled, solidified, into something focused and purposeful. It had become a plan. Margaret had wanted to bring secrets out into the open. She believed they were damaging to a family. Fine, I would honor her wishes. I would take her longest, darkest secret and I would drag it into the light. She had revealed my secret to an audience of a dozen people. I would reveal hers to the entire world she had so carefully built. The architect in me was wide awake now. It was time to start drawing up the plans for a demolition. The next morning, the world looked different. The muted gray of my grief had been replaced by a sharp, high-definition clarity. I felt a purpose I hadn't felt in weeks. My mission was clear. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about leveling a playing field that had been tilted in her favor for far too long. My first step was to build a case. An architect doesn't build without a blueprint. And I wouldn't strike without irrefutable proof. The letters and the photograph were a powerful start, but they were from the past. I needed to know if the affair was ongoing. I needed a timeline. I needed corroboration. I started with the photos in the larger box. I spread them out on the dining room table, arranging them by year, creating a visual history of the Weston family. And I looked for Arthur. He was there, a constant presence in the background. At birthday parties, he was always standing next to Margaret. At a family picnic, while Richard was manning the grill, Arthur was sitting with Margaret on a blanket, their heads close together in conversation, in a Christmas photo from 1995. As the family opened presents, Margaret was looking at Arthur, a small, secret smile on her face, while Richard was oblivious, showing a young Ben how to work a new toy. Individually, each photo meant nothing, but together, they told a story. A story of proximity, of intimacy, of a bond that was clearly deeper than that of a mere family friend. I scanned each photo, creating a digital file, a secret archive of her secret life. Next, I needed to talk to someone who had been there, who might have seen something without realizing what it was. My target was Richard's younger sister, Aunt Patty. Patty was the family scatterbrain, a sweet, flighty woman who was often dismissed by Margaret as being a bit of a mess. She was also, I suspected, more observant than anyone gave her credit for, and she had always been kind to me. I invited her for lunch, under the guise of wanting advice on how to make things right with Margaret. It was a calculated risk. Patty was loyal to her brother, but she had no great love for her sister-in-law. We sat in a quiet corner of a bustling restaurant. I let her talk first, listening to her recount the drama of the birthday dinner, her voice full of sympathy for me. Margaret can be difficult, she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially. She has to be the queen of every castle, always has. This was my opening. She and Richard seemed so solid, though, I said, my voice a careful blend of admiration and innocence. 40 years, it's amazing. Oh, they are, Patty said. Richard adores her, always has. He's a saint, that man. She took a sip of her iced tea. And it's a good thing, too. Margaret needs a steady hand. Arthur has been a good friend to them too, hasn't he? I asked, keeping my tone casual. It's so nice that he's been around for so long. Patty's eyes clouded over for a second, a flicker of something I couldn't quite read. / Oh, Arthur. She said, yes, dear, loyal. Arthur always there, especially for Margaret. She said it with a slight, almost imperceptible emphasis. I leaned in, my voice dropping. Patty, I said, I'm going to ask you something, and you can tell me if I'm crazy. But I've always felt a vibe between them. Patty froze, her fork halfway to her mouth. She looked around the restaurant, as if she expected Margaret to materialize out of thin air. She leaned forward, her voice a whisper. You saw it too? Bingo, I wasn't sure, I said, my heart pounding. The way they look at each other sometimes, it's been going on for years, Patty whispered. A flood of pent-up gossip finally unleashed. I don't Know the details. I don't want to know, but everyone knows. Well, not Richard. Poor Richard, he doesn't see it, or maybe he chooses not to. But the rest of us, we've always just looked the other way. It's just how it is. She told me about a trip Margaret had supposedly taken with a girlfriend to a spa in Vermont. A trip from which she had returned looking radiant. Patty had later found out from Arthur's ex-wife that he had been at a legal conference in Vermont that very same weekend. She told me about the late-night phone calls Margaret used to get. Calls she would always take in another room. She told me about the times she had walked in on them in the kitchen after a party. Their hands clasped on the counter, an intimacy in their shared gaze that was broken the second they saw her. I listened, my mind a sponge, soaking up every detail. Each story was another piece of the puzzle, another nail in the coffin I was building for Margaret's reputation. I felt a pang of guilt for using Patty this way, but I pushed it down. This was bigger than my feelings. This was about a truth that had been buried for decades. When I left the restaurant, I had what I needed. I had corroboration. I had a pattern of behavior. The picture was becoming clearer, sharper, and more damning. My rage had found its focus, and it was a laser beam. The next step was to find the one piece of evidence that was undeniable, something current that would tie the past to the present. My quiet investigation was about to enter a new, more aggressive phase. The fragile truce Ben and I had reached was holding, but just barely. We were talking again, but our conversations were minefields of unspoken words. The ghost of the birthday dinner haunted every room of our apartment. He was trying, I could see that. He was hurt, but he was also a man who loved his wife and was trying to find his way back to her. But I knew we couldn't truly move forward until the air was cleared. Not just between us, but between me and his mother. He wanted peace, I wanted justice. They were two very different things. One evening he found me at the dining room table, surrounded by the old photographs. I had forgotten to put them away, and they were spread out like a strange, incriminating mosaic. Of course, dear, she said, come by any time. I'll get them all out for you. The next day, I went to her house, the museum of her perfect life. She presented me with 3 large, leather-bound photo albums, her hands patting my arm in a gesture of restored favor. I was back in her good graces. It was a sickening, empowering feeling, back in my apartment, which I had now turned into my war room. I began my work. I was an architect designing the most important structure of my life. The slideshow was my blueprint. It had to be perfect, the pacing, the music, the narrative arc. It had to lull them into a sense of sentimental security. And then, at the precise moment, it had to detonate. I spent hours scanning photos, pictures of Richard and Margaret on their wedding day, young and hopeful, pictures of them bringing a newborn Ben home from the hospital, pictures of family vacations, holidays, milestones. I wove them together, creating a tapestry of a happy, loving marriage. I chose a soundtrack of syrupy, romantic ballads. The first 3 minutes of the slideshow were a masterpiece of schmaltz. Then, I started to intersperse the happy family photos with the evidence of her secret life. It was a subtle, creeping infiltration. A picture of the family at Christmas, 1995. Followed by a close-up of the secret smile on Margaret's face as she looked at Arthur. A picture of Richard and Margaret at their 25th anniversary party. Followed by a scanned image of one of Arthur's love letters. His spidery handwriting now digitized and clear. To see you, even for those stolen hours, is to feel the world come alive in color again. The centerpiece of my attack was the Vermont trip. I found a picture of Margaret from that year, posing in a new silk scarf. The very one mentioned on the hotel receipt. I would put that picture on the screen, and then I would dissolve to the hotel folio. Every detail highlighted. Guest name, Margaret Weston. Room service for 2, spa charges X2. The evidence cold, hard, and irrefutable. The final image of the slideshow was the black and white photograph from the cigar box. Margaret and Arthur, young, happy, and in love. I would let that image hang on the screen in silence for a full 10 seconds before the screen went black. As I worked, a strange, cold calm settled over me. This was not a crime of passion. It was a premeditated, calculated act of destruction. I felt a flicker of doubt, a ghost of my former self whispering in my ear, is this who you are now, a vengeful, cruel person? I looked at the solicitor's letter, still sitting on my desk, the key to my future, A future she had tried to poison before it had even begun. I thought of the pain in Ben's eyes, a pain she had put there. The doubt vanished. This wasn't cruelty, it was a rebalancing of the scales. It was a controlled demolition of a structure built on lies. I was just the architect, executing the plan. She had handed me the sledgehammer when she broke my trust. Now, I was simply going to use it. The night of the anniversary party was a surreal fever dream. The event was held at a lavish country club, the ballroom dripping with floral arrangements and twinkling lights. 2 large projection screens had been set up on either side of the stage, ready for my presentation. The room was filled with over 100 guests, a testament to the life and the reputation Richard and Margaret had built, or rather, the reputation she had carefully constructed. With him as her unwitting foundation, I moved through the crowd, a glass of champagne in my hand, a fixed smile on my face. I felt like a spy, a saboteur on the outside. I was Alara, the dutiful daughter-in-law, now thankfully back in line. On the inside, I was a ticking bomb. Ben was by my side, his hand resting on the small of my back. He was happy, relaxed, proud of me for making this gesture. He thought tonight was about healing. The guilt of my deception towards him was a sharp, uncomfortable stone in my gut. But I told myself this was a necessary pain, a surgical strike that would ultimately save us from a lifetime of her poison. Tonight, I would lance the boil. The healing could start tomorrow. Margaret was in her element. She wore a silver, floor-length gown, looking every bit the queen she believed herself to be. She glided through the room, accepting compliments, her laughter tinkling like ice in a glass. She greeted me with a warm, theatrical hug. "Elara dear," she whispered in my ear. "Thank you for this, it means the world to me, to us, of course, Margaret," I said, my smile feeling brittle. "It's my pleasure." The dinner was endless. Speeches were made. Toasts were given, friends and family stood up to share stories of Richard and Margaret's long and happy marriage. Each word of praise, each anecdote of their devotion was another layer of hypocrisy that I was about to strip away. Finally, the moment came. The MC, a jovial friend of the family, tapped the microphone, and now, he announced, we have a very special tribute. A walk down memory lane, put together with love by their wonderful daughter-in-law, Alara. A smattering of applause. All eyes turned to me. Ben squeezed my hand, his eyes shining with pride. "You've got this," he whispered. I walked to the podium where my laptop was connected. My heart was a hammering drum against my ribs. My hands were cold and clammy. For one terrifying second, I thought I couldn't do it. The ghost of the old Alara, the one who craved peace at any cost, rose up, begging me to stop. Then I looked at Margaret. She was seated at the head table, next to Richard. She caught my eye and gave me a little, encouraging nod. A queen bestowing her favor upon a loyal subject. The sight of her smug, confident face was like a splash of ice water. The doubt vanished. I remembered her voice on the phone. "He has chosen a wife who is full of surprises. You have no idea," I thought. I took a deep breath, and I pressed play. The first few minutes were perfect. The romantic music swelled. Pictures of their youth, their wedding, their young family, filled the screens. The room was filled with soft, sentimental ahs. I saw people dabbing their eyes. Ben was smiling, his arm around his father's shoulder. It was a beautiful, loving tribute. I had built the facade perfectly. Now, it was time to light the fuse. The first hint of a shift was subtle. The Christmas photo followed by the close-up of Margaret's secret smile. A few people in the audience shifted in their seats. A subconscious flicker of confusion. Then, the picture of their 25th anniversary, followed by the scanned image of the love letter. The words, "My dearest Margaret," hung on the screen. A confused murmur rippled through the room. Ben's smile faltered. He looked at the screen, then at me, a question forming in his eyes. Then came Vermont, the picture of Margaret in the silk scarf, and then, the slow dissolve to the hotel folio. I had animated it so that each damning detail appeared one by one. Guest, Margaret Weston, a gasp from the crowd. Room service for 2, a louder gasp. Spa charges x2. People were turning to look at each other, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. I looked at the head table. Richard was staring at the screen, his face pale, his mouth slightly agape. He looked utterly bewildered, like a man who had just woken up in a foreign country. And Margaret, her face was a mask of frozen horror. The color had drained from her cheeks. Her serene, queenly composure had shattered. replaced by a raw, primal panic. Her eyes darted from the screen to me, and in them, I saw it. All fury, terror, and finally, a dawning, terrible understanding. She knew what I had done. The slideshow continued, relentless, clinical. I had timed it perfectly. Each new piece of evidence built upon the last, leaving no room for doubt, no possibility of escape. The final image, the black and white photo of her and Arthur, filled the screens. Young, happy in love, the room was dead silent. The only sound was the frantic, panicked breathing of the woman at the head table. I let the image hang there for the full 10 seconds, an eternity of judgment. Then the screens went black. The show was over. The demolition was complete. I love you, Elara, he whispered into my hair. Even the scary, vengeful, slideshow-making version of you. I looked up at him, a watery laugh escaping my lips. I'm not sure I like that version of me very much. I don't either, he admitted, but I understand her. And I love the woman she was fighting for. We were not fixed. Our marriage was not magically healed. There was a long road ahead of us, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on that road together. We had found our way back to the foundation. He looked around the empty office again, a slow smile spreading across his face. He pointed to the sign on the door, // Hayes Architecture. He said, it's got a good ring to it. But it's missing something. He walked over to the door, pulled a marker out of his pocket, and right next to my name, he wrote in his familiar, steady hand, and Weston, it was always supposed to be both of us, he said. Turning back to me, his eyes shining, it still can be. I looked at our names, intertwined on the door. A new structure, a new beginning, built not on secrets or lies, but on a hard one, painful truth. It wasn't the future I had planned, but it was the future we had earned. And as we stood there, in the middle of our empty office, ready to lay the first brick, I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that we were going to build something beautiful, something strong, something that would last. The silence that followed the black screens was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was a vacuum, sucking all the air and joy out of the room. It was broken by a single sharp sound, a woman's sob. It was Aunt Patty. Then chaos. 100 conversations erupted at once, a roar of whispers, gasps, and horrified exclamations. People were standing up, turning to each other, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and a kind of morbid, fascinated horror. The party was over. The 40-year marriage, a celebrated institution just moments before, was now a public spectacle, a train wreck for all to see. My eyes were locked on the head table. Richard hadn't moved. He was still staring at the blank screen, his face ashen. He looked like a statue, a man turned to stone by a truth too monstrous to comprehend. Arthur Prescott, who had been seated at a nearby table with his own wife, was ashen-faced. His eyes wide with panic, he looked like a cornered animal. And Margaret, she finally moved. She pushed her chair back, the legs scraping violently against the floor. She stood up, her silver gown shimmering under the lights. Her face was no longer a mask of horror. It was a contorted, ugly rictus of pure, unadulterated hatred. Her eyes, burning with a furious, terrible light, found mine across the room. If looks could kill, I would have been incinerated on the spot. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She took a staggering step towards me, her hand raised as if to strike, and then her knees seemed to buckle. She swayed, and Ben, who had been frozen in his chair, finally sprang into action. He caught her before she fell, his face a mask of confusion and concern. He was holding up the woman who had just been exposed as a liar, and I knew, in that moment, that the chasm between us was wider than ever. I turned and walked away from the podium. I didn't run. I walked with a deliberate, steady pace, my head held high. I could feel the eyes of everyone in the room on me. 100 pairs of eyes, judging me, pitying me, hating me. I didn't care. I navigated through the stunned crowd, a ghost at the funeral of my own making. I found Ben outside on the terrace, in the cool night air. He was leaning against the stone balustrade, staring out into the dark. He didn't look at me as I approached. Elara, he said, his voice a dead, hollow thing. What did you do? I did what she did to me, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I brought a secret out into the open. That was not a secret, he said, finally turning to face me. His eyes were filled with a pain so deep it was almost black. That was a bomb you blew up my family. My father, did you see his face? You destroyed him. She destroyed him. I shot back, my voice rising. She destroyed him every day for 40 years with her lies. I just turned on the lights so he could finally see it. Don't you dare put this on me. Ben, she did this, she started this, and you finished it, he said, his voice breaking. In the cruelest, most public way imaginable. You humiliated them. You humiliated me. This wasn't justice, Alara, this was vengeance, and it was ugly. He was right, of course. It was ugly, it was a terrible, destructive, vengeful act, but it had also been necessary. It was the only language she understood. The only way to make her feel even a fraction of the humiliation she had inflicted on me. Sometimes justice is ugly, I said. Quietly, she backed me into a corner. She tried to ruin my marriage. She tried to ruin my life. What was I supposed to do? Ben, send her a thank you note. He just shook his head, a look of profound, weary sadness on his face. I don't know who you are anymore, he whispered. The words were a blade in my heart, sharper than any of Margaret's insults. I had won, I had brought down the queen, but I had lost my king. The victory felt bitter and cold and incredibly, devastatingly lonely. I stood on the terrace. The sounds of the shattered party behind me, and for the first time, since I'd found those letters, I felt a tremor of regret. I had demolished her life, but in the rubble, I was standing all alone. The weeks that followed the anniversary party were a desolate, silent landscape. The Weston family, once a tight, if dysfunctional, unit, had imploded. Richard had moved out of the house and was staying with his sister Patty. He refused to speak to Margaret. He refused to speak to me. The divorce papers were, I heard through the family grapevine, already being drawn up. Arthur Prescott and his wife were also separating. The shrapnel from my bomb had hit. Everyone, Ben and I were living in the same apartment, but we were miles apart. He was polite, distant, a ghost haunting the edges of my life. He slept in the spare room. The silence between us was a constant, aching presence. He looked at me with a mixture of anger and a deep, wounded sadness that I couldn't seem to breach. I had revealed his mother's secret, but in doing so, I had also shattered his own carefully constructed world, his belief in his family, his past. I had forced him to see a truth he had never wanted to see, and he couldn't forgive me. For it, I had expected to feel a sense of triumph, of righteous satisfaction. I had won, I had exposed the hypocrite. I had rebalanced the scales, but there was no joy in it. There was only a cold, hollow emptiness. Vengeance, I discovered, was a meal best served cold. But it left a bitter aftertaste that lingered long after the plate was empty. I threw myself into my work, the one area of my life where I still felt competent, in control. I finalized the paperwork for the inheritance. I leased a small, sunlit office space in a converted warehouse district downtown. The sign on the door read Hayes Architecture, not Weston and Hayes, just Hayes. It felt both liberating and incredibly lonely. I was building our dream, but I was doing it alone. One evening, I was sitting in the empty office, surrounded by paint samples and flooring catalogs. When Ben walked in, he hadn't told me he was coming. He stood in the doorway, looking around, at the empty space, at the name on the door. You did it, he said, his voice quiet. It was the first time he had spoken to me about anything other than household logistics in weeks. I did, I said. My heart starting to beat a little faster. He walked into the room, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. He stopped in front of me, his eyes scanning my face as if he were seeing me for the first time. My father called me today. He said, he's a wreck, but he's also free. That's the word he used, free. He shook his head, a look of wonder on his face. He told me he's known, on some level, for years. He just didn't want to believe it. He said you gave him a terrible gift, but a necessary one, the gift of the truth. I held my breath, not daring to hope. I've been so angry at you, he continued, his voice thick with emotion. I hated what you did. The cruelty of it, the publicness of it, it felt so unlike you. She made me unlike me, I whispered. I know, he said, and he finally, looked at me with something other than anger. It was a flicker of understanding. I've been thinking about it all, the little things. The way she'd undermine you, the way she tried to turn me against you, the way she took your secret and used it to humiliate you. I was so busy trying to keep the peace. I didn't see the war she was waging against you. Against us. He took a step closer, reaching out and taking my hand. His touch was tentative, but it was there. What you did was terrible, he said softly, but what she did to you, over years, was worse. I chose to be blind to it. And I am so sorry for that. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. The tears I had refused to shed for weeks finally came. They streamed down my face, hot and cleansing. He pulled me into his arms and I buried my face in his chest, sobbing out all the loneliness and the guilt and the pain of the past month. He just held me, his hand stroking my hair. What's all this? He asked, his voice cautious. Just looking at old pictures, I said, my heart starting to race. I was thinking of making a slideshow for your parents' anniversary. It's coming up, isn't it, their 40th? The lie came so easily it scared me, but the idea, once spoken, took root. A slideshow, a public presentation, the perfect venue. Ben's face softened. That's really thoughtful of you, Elara, he said, especially after everything. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when he was stressed or conflicted. Look, he said, pulling out a chair and sitting down opposite me. We need to talk. I braced myself. I've been a jerk, he said, his eyes meeting mine. They were filled with a sincerity that made my throat ache. I was hurt. And I let my mom get in my head, but you're my wife, my partner, and I should have trusted you. I should have stood up for you, and I'm sorry. I am so sorry. The apology I had been waiting for, the one I needed from him, finally came, and it cracked something open in me. The cold, hard shell of my anger fissured. And for a moment, the grief and hurt underneath came rushing back. A single tear traced a path down my cheek. I just wanted to surprise you, I whispered. I wanted to give you this amazing gift, our dream. I know, he said softly. And it was a beautiful thought. Your heart was in the right place, even if your execution was a little flawed. A small smile played on his lips. I laughed, a watery, choked sound. Flawed is one word for it. We sat in silence for a moment, the air between us finally clearing. It wasn't a fix. It wasn't a magic wand that could erase the past few weeks, but it was a start. It was a foundation we could rebuild on. I love you, he said, even when you're keeping life-altering secrets from me. I love you too, I said. Even when you believe your mother over me. The joke was gentle, but it had an edge. We were healing, but the scar was still there. I didn't tell him about my plan. I couldn't. This was my battle to fight. He would never understand the need for this particular brand of justice. He would call for peace, for forgiveness, for letting it go. But I couldn't let it go. To do so would be to let her win, to validate her betrayal. My love for my husband and my need for revenge were two separate, powerful forces. And I was determined to keep them from colliding. The conversation with Ben, however, solidified my resolve. His apology, his love, made me even more furious at his mother. She hadn't just hurt me, she had hurt her own son. She had weaponized his love and loyalty, and caused him pain, all for the sake of a petty power trip. She didn't deserve a son like him. My investigation now had a deadline, the 40th anniversary party. It was 6 weeks away. I needed something concrete, something that couldn't be explained away. Patty's story about the trip to Vermont was my best lead. I needed proof. The architect in me took over. I started thinking in terms of data, records, and timelines. I went online, digging into the archives of the Vermont Bar Association. I found the details of the legal conference Arthur had attended 5 years prior. The dates matched Patty's story exactly. Next, I hired a service, a discreet online investigation agency that could legally access travel and hotel records. It was expensive, a significant chunk of the money I had set aside for our firm. But I considered it a business expense, an investment in our future freedom. I gave them Margaret's name and the dates of the conference. I told them she was believed to have been staying in or near Stowe, Vermont. Then, I waited, for 3 agonizing days. I heard nothing. I started to think it was a dead end, that I had wasted my money. Then an email landed in my inbox. It had a single attachment, a PDF file. I opened it. It was a hotel folio, a receipt from a quaint, luxurious bed and breakfast in Stowe, Vermont called the Stone Hearth Inn. The name on the reservation was Arthur Prescott. The receipt was for a 5-night stay. A single king-sized bed, and there, under the section for additional charges, were the details that made my vision go sharp and my blood run cold. 2 sets of spa charges, onto different days, room service for 2, every single morning, and a charge from the hotel's gift shop for a woman's silk scarf. But the final damning piece of evidence was at the bottom of the page. Under the credit card information, it showed the card used to pay the bill, an American Express card in the name of Arthur Prescott, and next to it, under the section for secondary guest information, was a single typed name, Margaret Weston. I printed the document, my hand steady. I had it, the smoking gun, a clear, irrefutable link. This wasn't a story from a gossiping aunt. This wasn't an old love letter. This was a modern, dated, official record of their time together, of her lie. I looked at the picture of Margaret on my desk, a photo from a recent family gathering. She was smiling, her arm linked through Richard's, the picture of a devoted wife, liar, hypocrite. The rage was back, cold and pure. The slideshow I was planning was no longer just a vague idea. It was a certainty, and it was going to be a masterpiece. Margaret, flush with her victory, had become insufferable. She treated me with a cloying, condescending pity, as if I were a child who had misbehaved and was now being graciously forgiven. She would call Ben, her voice dripping with concern, asking if I was feeling better, if I was coming to terms with my actions. Each phone call was a fresh twist of the knife, a reminder that in her world, she was the hero and I was the villain. She had no idea that I was a snake in her garden, that while she was preening, I was gathering my venom. Her smugness, her utter lack of remorse, only fueled my determination. Every passive-aggressive comment, every faint expression of concern, was another log on the fire of my cold fury. The invitation to the anniversary party arrived, thick and cream-colored, just like the solicitor's letter that had started this whole mess. Richard and Margaret Weston invite you to celebrate 40 years of love and marriage. I stared at the words, a bitter laugh rising in my throat. 40 years of lies. This was my moment. I called her that evening, my voice a careful construction of warmth and humility. Margaret, I said, the invitation is beautiful. Ben and I are so looking forward to it. Oh, good, she said, her tone implying she had been worried I wouldn't come. We're so hoping it will be a chance for the family to heal the audacity of it. I agree, I said, my voice smooth as silk. And I was thinking, I'd love to do something special for you both, as a gift. I was thinking I could put together a slideshow of photos from the past 40 years, set to music, a tribute to your marriage. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear her processing it. The difficult daughter-in-law, the one who had been so recently disgraced, was now offering to create a public tribute to her. It was a gesture of capitulation, an offering of peace. It was perfect. Why, Alara, she finally said, her voice filled with surprise and pleasure. That is a wonderfully thoughtful idea. Are you sure you're up to it? I'd love to, I said. It would be my honor. It would be a way for me to apologize for all the recent unpleasantness. The words almost choked me, but I got them out. I was playing her game now, and I was playing to win. Well, in that case, she said, her voice now dripping with magnanimous forgiveness, I think that would be just lovely. What a wonderful way to move forward. She had taken the bait. Hook, line, and sinker. I'll need some photos, I said. Do you have any albums I could borrow? I still have that one box you gave me, but I'll need more from the last 20 years.